Everyone, and thank you all for joining us for today's presentation. My name is Marissa, an attorney with Legal Aid of North Carolina's Helpline. Today, we have Megan Neal presenting for us. If you are unfamiliar with the format of if you are unfamiliar with the format of this event, first, Megan is going to review a PowerPoint presentation. At the end of the presentation, we will have a question and answer session. If at any point during the presentation you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A box on Zoom or in the comments section on Facebook. We'll review all questions put in those chat boxes during that Q&A session at the end. Please remember that this is a public forum and legal aid is not representing you at this time. So be sure not to reveal personal details about yourself and to keep your questions as general as possible, as we cannot provide any legal advice specific to your individual situation. The session will end when there are no more questions, and regardless of where we are, we will have a hard stop at 4:30 p.m. With all that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Megan to get us started.
Thanks, Marissa. Like Marissa said, I'm Megan. I'm an attorney at Legal Aid of North Carolina. I'm in the Greensboro office. And I'm here to talk to you today about SSDI and SSI. And I'm specifically going to be talking about applications and appeals for those two federal disability benefits programs. And we're also specifically going to be talking about adult cases. The eligibility rules for children are a bit different, so that's going to be outside of the scope of the presentation today. So specifically, we're going to kind of start with an overview of eligibility for the two different programs. Then we're going to go into the application process, and then we're going to talk about the appeal process. So let's get started. So SSI and SSDI are federal disability benefits programs. So in order to be eligible for either of these programs, you have to be medically disabled under Social Security's rules and Social Security's definition of disability. So the word disability can mean a lot of different things in a lot of different contexts. So it's important to hone in on specifically how Social Security defines it. So I'm going to just read to you the definition, which is on the slide from the regulations. So the regulations define disability as the inability to do any substantial gainful activity by reason of any medically determinable physical or mental impairment, which can be expected to result in death, or which has lasted or can be expected to last for a continuous period of not less than 12 months. So to kind of translate that a little bit, the way I would sum that up is you have to have a severe medical condition that prevents you from working on a competitive and full-time basis. The way this plays out in the Social Security context is quite complex, but I think for the purposes of today, we can just use that understanding of disability. And in a different presentation, I talk a little bit more about the medical definition of disability and kind of go into that in a little bit more depth. But today we're going to just talk more about the non-medical eligibility requirements and the appeals and applications process. So to get into that non-medical eligibility. So both of these programs are going to use the same medical standard, which is what I just read, but they're going to have different non-medical eligibility requirements. So we'll start with the non-medical eligibility requirements for SSDI, which is on the left-hand column there. So first of all, SSDI can go by a few different names. You might hear it referred to differently depending on who you talk to or what you're looking at or reading. Some of the common names, of course, are SSDI. You may also hear it referred to as DIB, which is disability insurance benefits. You also may hear it referred to as Title II benefits. This is from the law that establishes SSDI. You're specifically going to hear that when you're talking to folks who work at the Social Security Administration. You might hear them say Title II, your Title II application. So SSDI is supposed to be an insurance program for disabled workers. So it's going to require that you have a significant work history. When you work, you pay into the SSDI system through payroll taxes. So the dollar amount that you receive from SSDI, if you're eligible, is going to be based on that earnings history. So the more you pay into the system, so to speak, the more you get out of it. You have to have become disabled before what is known as your date last insured. That is typically going to be 5 years from when you last worked. So you have to have become disabled. You have to prove that you became disabled within 5 years of when you last worked. SSDI is not a means tested benefits, not a means tested benefit. So if you otherwise qualify for SSDI, you're going to qualify regardless of the amount of other income or resources you have. This is really different from SSI, which we'll talk about in a second. SSI is a means tested benefit. One difference in between the two programs has to do with retroactivity. So for SSDI, you can get back pay up to 1 year prior to your application date. Finally, SSDI is linked to Medicare. After you've been receiving SSDI for 24 months, you're going to be entitled to Medicare coverage. So now we're going to go into SSI, Supplemental Security Income. That's there in the right-hand column. SSI also goes by some different names. You'll hear Social Security. You'll hear workers at the Social Security Administration refer to it often as Title 16 benefits. And again, that comes from the law that creates SSI. So unlike SSDI, in which your benefit amount is going to be based on your earnings history, the federal government sets the SSI payment rate. It's called the federal benefit rate, FBR. In 2026, the FBR is $994 a month. That goes up every year. The dollar amount of SSI you receive might be reduced if you're getting other forms of income or support. So other income, for example, can be counted against your SSI amount, and then your SSI amount will be reduced. So unlike SSDI, which is not a means-tested program, SSI is a means-tested program. This means that SSI is only available for folks with low income and low resources. The resource limit for a single individual is $2,000, and for a couple, it's $3,000. So you can't have more than $2,000 in resources or savings if you want to be eligible for SSI. So for SSI, you either have to be disabled using that medical definition from earlier or over 65. If you are eligible for SSI, you can receive benefits going back to the first of the month after the month of application. So back pay can go for SSDI, back pay can go back up to 12 months before your application, but for SSI, you can only get paid starting with the month after you apply. And SSI is going to be linked to Medicaid. When you become eligible for SSI, you also automatically become eligible for Medicaid. So that's just a brief overview of some of the non-medical eligibility requirements for both programs and then kind of the differences between each program. So now just to sort of get a little bit of context for the upcoming few slides, we're going to talk about the different kind of offices that you might interact with when you apply for these benefits or when you appeal for these benefits. So SSA is the Social Security Administration. This is the overall federal agency that administers these benefits programs. They also administer some other programs, but SSA administers Title II and Title 16 benefits. There are local offices all around the country. We call these field offices. This is the office that you kind of interact with on a day-to-day basis. You can find your local field office on the ssa.gov website. You see the address there for the field office locator. Another office you may interact with is called DDS, Disability Determination Services. That's where your case gets sent for workup after you've applied. This is the office that determines whether you meet that medical definition of disability. Another office you might interact with is called the Office of Hearings Operations. We call that OHO. If you have to appear before an administrative law judge, an ALJ for a hearing, that is where your hearing is going to be held. And you can find your local hearing office also on the ssa.gov website. Finally, another office you may interact with is called the Appeals Council. We often say AC. This is the body of appeals judges, which is in Falls Church, Virginia. The Appeals Council hears the final level of administrative appeal. So if you lose your hearing before an ALJ, you can then appeal it to the Appeals Council. You're never going to have to go there in person because appeals to the Appeals Council are what we call a paper appeal. They make decisions only based on the records and papers and transcripts that have been filed in your case. So next, let's talk about the application process. So if you think you might qualify for either one of these programs and you want to apply, you can typically either file online or just call your local field office directly. So you can generally apply for SSDI online, and certain SSI applications can be filed online. But when in doubt, I would say just call your field office and tell them that you want to file an application. They'll probably make an appointment for you. You can do it over the phone. The date that you call should be considered your protective filing date. So that's the date that they should use as your actual application date, even if your appointment is actually scheduled like for a month in the future, something like that. So when you apply, there are several different forms that Social Security is going to ask you to fill out, including a medical release form so that they can get your medical records. I want to plug a little resource that they have that's on their website. It's called the Adult Disability Starter Kit. You can find that pretty easily if you just Google it. Maybe Marissa can find it and put a link in the chat. This is not the actual application, but it's like a little cheat sheet that will help you get everything you need to prepare the application. Let's see. So then after you fill out all those forms, what they're going to be doing is they're going to be determining your non-medical eligibility. So that's the things we talked about on the previous slide. So for SSI, they need to determine your income and resource levels. For SSDI, they need to determine the information related to your work history or earnings history. If they determine that you meet the non-medical requirements, your case then is going to get sent to the DDS, which is in Raleigh. And the DDS is going to work on obtaining all your medical records. The records that they request are only going to be the ones that you tell them about. So they have all these forms. Like I said, they want you to fill out when you apply. This is how you tell them where you've been getting medical treatment. And then they're going to request those medical records. So that's one reason it's really important to give them complete and accurate information when you're filling out these forms. They might send you to a medical appointment with what's called a consultative examiner, a CE. That is one of Social Security's doctors who's going to examine you and assess your medical status. After that, the CE will write up a report and they'll send your case to a medical consultant who will offer an opinion about whether you meet Social Security's medical definition of disability. And after all that is done, which can take, up to, I'd say, several months, then the file is going to be sent back to your local field office, and you'll get a notice in the mail saying whether your case has been approved or disapproved. So, unfortunately, as you can see here, if you look at this chart on the right side of the screen, it is pretty common for a case to be denied at the initial level. We're going to go through this chart a little bit more and see why you should keep appealing, because your best chance of winning is going to actually be at the administrative law judge level. So if you look at this top level on the right-hand corner, if you can see it, 62% of cases are denied at the initial level and 38% are allowed or approved. So if you get a disapproved claim and you want to appeal, then the first step is called a request for reconsideration. With a request for reconsideration, the case is going to get sent back to the DDS which is that office in Raleigh that's looking at the medical evidence. And different people, a different set of people from the first time around are going to re-review everything and issue a new decision. They're going to send you a bunch of new forms at this stage. And again, whenever they're sending forms, you want to make sure that you're really looking at these and filling them out completely and accurately. 84% of cases get denied at the reconsideration level. 16% get approved. So if your case is denied at the reconsideration level, the next step is to request an ALJ hearing. This is going to be when you appear either in person or by phone or online video hearing. You're going to appear before an administrative law judge. You're going to be there seeing or at least hearing the judge person to person. The judge is going to look at all of your medical records and the other evidence in your case. If you want to, if you think it would be helpful for your case, you could bring a witness. If you have a representative, the person can appear with you at the hearing. There may be a vocational expert at the hearing. There may be a medical expert. You have your best chance of winning at this level. So 51% of cases are approved at this level. 16% of cases are dismissed. That's typically going to be when someone doesn't appear at the hearing. 33% of cases are denied. And I should say this is nationwide data. So it's not like broken down by state, or it's not North Carolina specific. And it's also from fiscal year 2024, which as far as I can tell is the most updated data they have. So things may have changed a little bit in the past year, and the stats might be slightly different for the state of North Carolina. If you are unsuccessful at the hearing level, you can file a request for review to the Appeals Council. This is the final level of administrative appeal in this whole process. Like I said, this is going to be a panel of judges. There's 3 of them. They're in Falls Church, Virginia, and they're making a decision just on the papers of your case, on the underlying record, the evidence that was submitted at the hearing, and the transcript of the hearing. At the Appeals Council, 1% of cases are approved, 3% are dismissed, 16% are remanded. We consider a remand to be a win at the Appeals Council level. A remand is when the Appeals Council sends your case back to the administrative law judge who originally heard your case. And the Appeals Council is going to give some specific instructions about the errors that they think the administrative law judge made in your case and what the judge needs to do to correct those errors. 80% of cases are denied at the Appeals Council level. If you're unsuccessful at the Appeals Council level, if you're one of those 80% of cases, you can file a complaint for judicial review in federal court. In federal court, 1% of cases are approved, 4% are dismissed, 63% are remanded. Again, we consider that a win. So it's going to be sent back ultimately to the administrative law judge who originally heard your case, with instructions to correct the errors they made. 32% of cases are denied in federal court. So that's just kind of an overview of the appeals process and your chances of success at each level. The last thing that we want to talk about are appeals deadlines. The most important thing you can do generally whenever you get any letters or notices from Social Security is to read the letters and notices and the instructions that are given. If you want to appeal something, they're always going to tell you the timelines for appeal. It might not be on the first page, but maybe on the second or third page, you'll find the timeline and also the instructions for appeal. So make sure to take a look at that if you get something that you think you might want to appeal. So for medical eligibility cases, you generally have 60 days from when you receive the notice to request an appeal. SSA assumes 5 days for mailing. Therefore, you have 65 days from the date on the notice to appeal. So the deadline that you're looking at is 65 days. For current beneficiaries, that's not something we're really talking about in this presentation, but if you're a current beneficiary, meaning you're currently receiving benefits and they're proposing to close your case, you can usually get aid pending the appeal, so you can get your benefits to continue if you request an appeal within 10 days. Again, we have 5 days for mailing, so that's 15 days from the date on the notice. If you are late filing your appeal, you can try to get an exception to the 65-day limit if you have good cause. So good cause means a very good reason. So a classic example of that would be if you were in the hospital when the appeals deadline ran out. You can tell Social Security, preferably in writing, what your good cause was and ask for an exception to that 65-day limit. Like I said, the notice that you get should give instructions on how to appeal, but in my opinion, the best way to appeal is probably going to be on Social Security's website, which is ssa.gov. You then want to make sure to print or save the screen that pops up showing the date and time you submitted the appeal. Another way to file an appeal is by going to your local Social Security office and completing the appeal form and getting a date stamped copy of whatever you submit to that. Whenever you're appealing or really submitting anything to Social Security, you want to make sure to keep your own proof that you submitted whatever you submitted. So that if you're doing it in person, that's going to be a date stamped copy of what you submitted. If you're doing it online, it's going to be the confirmation screen that pops up after you submit it. If you're faxing, it's going to be the fax confirmation sheet. And I think that is it for today. If you have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. If you want to apply for help from Legal Aid of North Carolina, we have a new online hub called the Justice Hub where you can apply for help. I put the address there. If that doesn't work for you, can also give us a call. And yeah, I think that's it for today.
Awesome. Putting that link to the Justice Hub in the chat now. People to Justice Hub. And we do have a few questions here in the chat. For those asking about how they can receive a copy of this presentation, I will talk about that towards the end. To those of you who have your hand raised, you cannot unmute in this forum. So if you have a question, you either need to type it in the Q&A box on Zoom or put it in the comment section on Facebook. We cannot allow you to unmute in this forum. Okay. Now I'm gonna try my best to answer this question. Question here. Someone saying that they qualify for retirement benefits from Social Security, had a disability while working, haven't worked for the last 7 years. Would they be forced to file for SSI instead of SSD because of the time they were out of work?
Um, I
And if
think,
that is too complicated,
yeah, I
we
think
can
this
move on.
question might be a little too complicated and maybe fact specific for this particular person. So, um, yeah, I don't know if that this is a question that we're going to be able to answer in this general presentation, unfortunately.
Okay. Someone's asking when's the right time to maybe um have an attorney involved in the situation? Is that before submitting the application, after submitting, after being denied? When should someone be thinking about seeking attorney help?
That's a great question. I mean, I think it kind of like varies. Um, I can tell you for legal aid, we are not able to get involved until you get to the hearing, the ALJ hearing level. Um, you know, depending on what attorney's office you're working with, they may be able to get involved at an earlier point.
Perfect. And I'm gonna leave just a second here because I did see the hand raised, so I want to give that person an opportunity to type their question in. It's gonna leave just a second to see if any more questions do come in before we talk about how you all can access this presentation after we conclude. All right. As I am not seeing any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you to all of you for joining us, with a very, very special thank you to Megan for presenting for us. If you would like to review anything that Megan talked about today, we have posted a recording of today's event to our Facebook page. It will be immediately available. You can access the recording with or without a Facebook account at www.facebook.com/legalaidnc. The recording will be available for about 30 days, but you will also be able to watch it at any time on Legal Aid of North Carolina's YouTube page in about a week or so. If you would like to register for one of our other Listen and Learn programs, such as criminal record expungement, child custody, tenant rights, you can do so on our website at www.legalaidnc.org/clinics. I want to say thank you all so much, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.
Thank you.